North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our marketing analyst this week. Many crop-growing areas of Nebraska stood still this week, drying out after earlier precipitation. As of the latest USDA crop progress report, Nebraska had completed 1/5 of its corn planting and was 6% finished with soybean planting. Nebraska and Louisiana were the only two states ahead of their 5-year averages for soybean planting progress. Many winter wheat growing areas would benefit from precipitation. To state the obvious, Kansas plants about 3.5 million more winter wheat acres than the next closest state, and all of Kansas is in some form of drought. The next two states in winter wheat plantings are Texas and Oklahoma. More than 90% of both are also in drought. If wheat in those areas doesn't make it, there's a chance the land could be used to grow another crop. Frayne joined us Thursday morning to discuss the outlook for wheat prices, the May crop report, and the early results from the Wheat Quality Council's Winter Wheat Tour.
Yeah, we're partway through the Winter Wheat Crop Tour, and the first couple days of the tour are showing actually some heavier losses than I think most of the people in the trade were expecting. On the first day, we looked at about a 20% decrease in expected yields from where we were last year. On the second day, which covered mainly the central and southwest portion of Kansas, we're looking at almost a 17% reduction from last year. So as we wrap up the third day, we're going to have to wait to see what the final numbers are, but basically the tour is confirming that the potential drought damage as well as some of the winter kill that we've had is starting to show up and definitely impacting yields.
If there is abandonment in some of those fields, what could that ground go to?
Well, you know, it really depends upon where you are within the region. The majority of the problem we're seeing is because of drought and drought impacts. And as a result, you know, the first issue is, are you going to try and abandon it, try and collect some crop insurance? In most cases, yields are not that bad, so they're going to have to be harvested. And even if they are abandoned because of drought, the obvious question is there enough soil moisture there to actually come back and replant a second crop? And in most cases, I suspect that that's not going to be the case, and so the acres that are abandoned are going to be abandoned.
North Dakota is one of the states in the midst of its spring wheat planting. Update me on the progress of that crop.
Well, this week in particular has been very cold and wet and rainy. We had a very cold winter this year, the lot of frost within the ground. It's taken quite a while for the ground to warm up. The rain that we've had will help with soil temperatures, will help improve that, but it's really delayed our spring planting. It's not to a point where people are getting critical. We're in a really bad place, although a lot of farmers are getting a bit concerned and very frustrated, obviously, with the weather conditions. Extended forecast looks a little bit better. Next week looks warmer and drier. And again, with today's equipment and the size of farms, we can get the crop seeded in a really, really quick hurry if the weather cooperates with us. So it's something to be watching, but nobody's pressing the panic button quite yet.
There's still uncertainty and ongoing turmoil in Ukraine. How is that situation affecting wheat prices here?
Well, there's kind of two different levels of information that we're watching for. There's kind of the short-term issues. The first thing the market's been looking for is, are the export sales that have already been booked, are they being delivered on? And so far, both out of Russia and Ukraine, the exports that have been on the books are being fulfilled. The next thing we're looking for, are there additional sales that are coming from that region? The sales pace seems to be dropping off. Again, some concerns about whether, even if you book some sales, are you going to get delivery on those? So some of the international buyers may be going to other destinations like the U.S. to try and pick up some of those. Longer term, we're watching kind of two things. The first would be what's going to happen for planted acreage, in particular in Ukraine. There's some concerns about farmers getting financing this spring. It's not necessarily going to impact the wheat market per se, because a lot of their wheat is winter wheat, so it's already been seeded, but it could potentially impact the acres of corn, barley, or something like sunflower that are more spring planted. So we do have to watch that. And again, longer term, you know, what's going to the kind of level of sanctions, what's the level of political unrest that's going to be observed in that region? You know, forecasting politics is even tougher than forecasting the weather, so we got to be, you know, watching that every day and seeing and looking for some updates.
Then I'll ask you to forecast the price. That should be an easy one for wheat here.
Yeah. Well, as we look short term, as we look at the charts right now, we are seeing some resistance, some upward resistance. We've had some really nice rallies the last couple of weeks because of all the conditions that we've been talking about. The question is, psychologically, can we push wheat prices higher than what we're seeing right now and today? And again, it's kind of a 50-50 deal. I think there's about 50% odds that we may push it higher, 50% odds that we may see a temporary top, and we may see some retracement as we move forward. So from a marketing standpoint, right now we're in very uncertain times. It's very hard to get a read on what direction we're headed next.
Reuters did a report this week on some shipping problems in Canada. Farmers having trouble getting rid of last year's harvest to make room for this year's crop. Can you expand on what the transportation issues look like in Canada and in your state as well?
Yeah, and there's been a whole host of issues, kind of a complicated story. The moral is, on the Canadian side of the line, they had an extremely large crop. In fact, the spring wheat crop was about 1.5 times their normal. They've also, just like here in North Dakota, had a very cold, tough winter. Rail transportation has been slowed because of the cold weather and some of the issues there. And they're just trying to handle a lot more volume of bushels, both spring wheat as well as canola. And so there's been some massive delays. There's been some real backlogs in delivery. And there's just, as you look at the math and look at the amount of grain that yet has to be delivered, there's no way that the Canadians are going to be able to deliver all of the crop that they produced last year and be able to get the bins cleaned out by the time we reach 2014 harvest. So kind of the issue that the Canadians are facing right now is, how do we balance old crop inventories and new crop production? And it's going to be a challenge. And some of that is actually spilling over into North Dakota. We have some very similar transportation problems here. We're trying our best to make those adjustments, but it's going to be a challenge.
The May crop report is next Friday. Frayne, expectations going into it?
Yeah, May crop report is the first time that we're going to get USDA forecast for the 2014-15 year, the official forecast out of WASDE. I think there'll be some really interesting things coming out when it looks in particular for the soybean side of the balance sheet. What are the export sales expectations, both for old crop and new crop? And the market will obviously be watching those very, very closely to get a read on what the demand base is.